I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today, my friend and colleague, Michaela Grobbel, who will share her work with you and her friendship with the Roma artist, Ceija Stojka. If you're a careful reader of the New York Times, you may be thinking, wasn't Stojka profiled in the newspaper just last week? The answer is yes. So Michaela's talk is especially timely today. We've had some security concerns, and so before we start, I want to remind everyone who is present in person or online that this is a classroom. It is a place of learning, not a place for politics or protest. If you disrupt this lecture or any lecture in the series for the purposes of protest, you will be asked to leave. The Mario Savio's free speech area is just outside the window back of the classroom. So regardless of the reasons why you decided to attend today's lecture, I invite you to stay with an open and curious mind. You will hear about the experience of the Roma in the Holocaust. It is undeniable that the vast majority of victims of the Holocaust were Jewish. About 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, and slightly more than 1/3 of all Jews worldwide were murdered during the Holocaust. Perishing alongside those Jews, often in the same camps, gas chambers, and mass graves, were smaller numbers of other groups. The Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled and mentally ill, and gays and lesbians. Acknowledging the targeting of these groups as part of the story of the Holocaust in no way diminishes the centrality of Jewish suffering. Instead, it reminds us that when one group is targeted, everyone's survival is made more precarious. So on to our speaker. Michaela Grobbel is Professor Emerita. Emerita means she's retired. Of German at Sonoma State University. She did her undergraduate work at the University of Bonn and her MA and PhD at UCLA. She has published widely on collective and individual memories of the Third Reich in Germany. She has written a book on the ancient art of memory, which was influential to her own feminist understanding of memory. She has long had an interest in the self-representations of non-German ethnic groups, such as Jews and Turks, in German-speaking countries. This is the origin of her interest in Stojka and the Roma. Besides organizing the first exhibit of Ceija Stojka's work in the United States, which was shown at SSU, Grobbel has brought to campus the well-known Romani singer, Ruza Nikolic Lakatos, I think that's how I would pronounce that. You would pronounce that. And Nikolic Lakatos' band from Austria. They performed their songs, which are recognized by UNESCO as Immaterial World Heritage at the Green Music Center. So now I turn the podium over to Michaela.
Hey, thank you very much, Stephen. I would also like to express my gratitude to Dean Carlton, and I'm so happy that you are here, as well as to the Center for the Study of the Holocaust and Genocide here at SSU, because you supported this book, which has the title, Roma Artist Ceija Stojka, What Should I Be Afraid Of?
By the way, that's my copy, and I want you to sign it before you.
But I'll do that. This book came out in conjunction in 2024 at an exhibit in New York of the same name at the Austrian Cultural Forum. And after my talk, if there are still some questions and you would like to learn more about the Romani Nazi genocide, you may want to check out this book because I have a chapter on that topic in this book. Let me start with Ceija Stojka's own words, quote, Actually, I am still afraid that Auschwitz is asleep, deep asleep. It could be woken up. Everything is still there, and the people are there too. End of quote. Ceija Stojka, whom you see on the slide, with her Auschwitz number Z6399 tattooed on her left arm, survived 3 Nazi concentration camps as a child. And she became a unique artist and spokesperson for Roma in Austria, and then also for other European countries about 60 years later. She was born into a traveling family in Austria and lived there from 2033 to her death in 2013. Stojka used art as a means to remember the history of the Nazi genocide of the Roma and Sinti, also known among them in their language as Primos, which means great devouring, or Samudaripen, which means mass killing. In this talk, I want to highlight Stojka's visual historiography as a memory space which displays critical links between past and present, and which also makes the unspeakable trauma visible. It makes us think about the potential of art as self-exploration, of healing through witnessing, but also as a form of political remembrance. It also calls for the necessity for dialogue between so-called minority and majority cultures to facilitate understanding of those who are viewed or marked as other or as just foreign. Let me first give you some background about the artist and about the Roma and Sinti. These cultures are still unknown today to many people, although they have been part of Europe for at least 900 years. Like the Jews, they have been persecuted for centuries, which culminated in the Nazi systematic efforts to murder all European Jews and Roma, as well as many other groups and individuals. Here you see one of my photographs showing Ceija Stojka painting in her kitchen in Vienna. I met her through my research and visited her for many summers. I also spent one sabbatical semester with her and her family in Vienna. She was not only a self-taught artist, but also a great storyteller, writer, and educator who gave hundreds of workshops in schools about the Nazi genocide. She was also one of the first advocates for Roma rights in Austria, and we became friends. When I met her in person in 2006, after corresponding on and off since the 1990s through the help of a friend of hers, I saw her stacks of incredible paintings. I was in awe, and I expressed my wish to share them with my students. 3 years later, together with my colleague Laurelie French from Pacific University in Oregon, we exhibited about 80 pieces of her art for the first time in the United States, including at SSU. Here you see photographs of our exhibit. I also organized the Roma film series, Roma concert, and a Roma dance workshop on campus during this time. We also showed her work in Oregon and in Vermont. We showed the art at Pacific University in Forest Grove, Oregon, here at Sonoma State, and then at West Branch Gallery and Sculpture Park in Stowe, Vermont. Here you see me looking together with Ceija at the guest book that I had put out here at SSU, and she was so happy about those very positive and heartfelt and enthusiastic comments, also very personal comments that were written down in that book. On this slide, we see Ceija's diversity of work. So you see a number of different motifs, scenes, and ways of painting. And she also painted and drew on whatever material was available for her. And since she did not have much money, she collected anything, including discarded glass jars or cardboard paper that she could use to paint on it. Note the work on the lower right side and the ravens that appear in many of her works. They function as God's ambassadors, in Ceija's words, who are able to transcend the camp fences and mediate between imprisonment and freedom. As part of her signature, you also see a branch in almost all of her works. She signs also with CS or Ceija Stojka, sometimes with her Auschwitz number. But this branch is a branch, you always find a branch because it remembers a certain tree in the Bergen-Belsen camp. And Ceija called it the tree of life because it helped her sustain, it helped sustain her and others, including her mother, through its young leaves. This is springtime, just shortly before liberation by the British in Bergen-Belsen at the end of the war, towards the end of the war. And they ate the bark and the sap, and during these terrible months of gradual starvation. Now, Ceija was a Romney. Who knows what the terms Romney or Rom mean?
HT, you have your hand up?
I had a guess. My guess is that it means like a wandering diaspora.
Okay, yeah, let's look at this. You are not far off because I think you are thinking about the Roma that often are or have been viewed as certainly as a diasporic global population, and often viewed as wandering people or traveling people in the past. Yeah. But some of the terms that you will hear from me, like Ceija is a Romney, that means a female Romani person. Rom in their own language means person, and male person and husband. The Roma that's the plural, and Romanis as well, but Romanis is usually used in British English. And here in the United States, we usually hear Roma, the use of Roma. Romani with an I is the adjective. So these are self-designated terms and not terms applied to from outsiders to them. And you are probably familiar with the term gypsy. That's usually in most contexts today a very problematic term because it's been so terribly abused, especially for centuries, but also especially by the Nazis. The Gage are the outsiders again, like I would be one, who is of non-Roma descent. Now, what do you know about the Roma, or what associations do you have with them? Yes.
I know they're typically associated with, well, negative stereotype is that they're associated with theft.
Yes. Yeah. What are you thinking about?
Well, I know that in Europe, they still consider them to be thieves and beggars.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Some other reactions? All right. Let's look at how outsiders have perceived and often still perceive this culture. We have actually certainly there are lots of stereotypical images, which is quite problematic. And as you point out, negative images, there's a whole long list of negative images, but also highly idealized images on the other side of the spectrum, which is also a problem because neither one really describes the culture in their reality. So on the negative side, they have been perceived for centuries as social outsiders, untrustworthy, mysterious, hard to understand, foreign, kind of uncivilized. They live on the margins of different cultures or have passed through different cultures, wild and asocial. Asocial, the Nazis used that term that the Bavarian police already in 1899, they set up a huge police office in Munich, Bavaria, where they try to analyze the Roma as so-called asocial people, and asocial meant work-shy people or criminals, basically, that the police then could take into custody. So on the other side, at the same time, we often see romanticization, idealizations, such as they are born with music in their blood. All of them are musicians, great musicians or dancers. They are close to nature. They today often function as an imaginary group that is outside of capitalist, modern, postmodern society, industrialized society, right? And they're also often portrayed as sensuous, passionate, and beautiful people, for example. And those images come directly from visual artistic representations that were produced in the 19th century, especially during Romanticism. We know through the study of their language, which is very interesting, that the Roma originated in northwest India, and especially in the Punjab and Rajasthan regions, and that they left India between 500 and 1000. That's an estimate CE. And here you see the migration route that has been established mostly through linguistic studies. They arrived in Europe in the 11th century, in Eastern Europe. And in what's Germany today, we have the first written record from 1407 that mentions their presence. That is interesting. It is a letter, basically a protection letter that protects the Roma so that they can enter and pass through one German city in the north, and that was the city of Hildesheim. So that's the first written record of their presence in what's today Germany, but in Eastern European countries, we have records that go back to the 14th century, even earlier. Some Roma became sedentary in their new homelands, others continued traveling. And those in the German-speaking lands and also neighboring countries today, some neighboring countries today, who settled down there are the Sinti. So basically they're a subgroup of the Roma, and I'm simplifying here, but that's why, especially in the German-speaking context, we talk about German and Sinti often. But Roma, or the Roma, that's also an umbrella term that encompasses a variety of Romani groups. And it's important to note that the Roma are not a homogeneous group, but consist of peoples with diverse customs, different religions, and often very different language variants. Yet one thing is tragically clear: they were all targeted by the Nazis after centuries of marginalization, forced migration, and persecution. So let me talk a little bit, give you some numbers and dates before I get into the visual representations, the paintings by Ceija Stojka. So the Poraimos, or Baro Poraimos, as it's called, or Samudaripen, refers to the Nazi genocide of Europe's Romani populations. Now, the fact is that 90% of Central European Roma and Sinti were killed. What's really tragic and presented a huge historical and cultural caesura or break is that most of the adult or older generation was eliminated, were killed. And they were the generation that passed on the history and the cultural knowledge to the younger generations. Who lost them then? And remember, it's traditionally an oral culture. So storytelling and singing and dancing are vehicles, are ways to transport this historical cultural knowledge, and helps maintain the cohesion of those Romani cultures. Here I listed, it's really not complete by any means, but I wanted to give you a sense and remind you of some Nazi laws. And I'm sure in this class, or even outside of class, you are familiar with quite a few of them, but they directly impacted the life of Ceija Stojka. Here, a young girl, this photo, you see that taken before, shortly after her arrest. The dates are wrong. Here it says March 1934, but of course they didn't have birth certificates, but we know that she was born in May 1933. And there is Ceija after, I think that photo is from maybe 2007, 2008, and she is showing here those photos that are collected in this book published by the Washington Holocaust Museum. What I find interesting here, and you may see that as well, even before Hitler was appointed Chancellor in Berlin, at the end of January 1933, 2 weeks before that, there was a very important conference in Burgenland, which is the federal state bordering onto Hungary, and that part used to belong to Hungary, and lots of Roma have been living there, and were living there. A conference between mayors and members of parliament, and they already convened in order to discuss the so-called gypsy question. And a proposal was discussed to arrest all Roma and transport them to an island in the Pacific. But that one, which was not, fortunately, well, it wasn't realized. If we then go on here to July 1933, we have the law for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases. That certainly also applied to the Jews, as well as to Roma and Black people, Black Germans, and later Black Europeans that were arrested and detained in order to stop, because their lives were considered unworthy, and in order to stop any propagation. In 1934, we already see the start gradually of sterilization and forced labor of Austrian Roma. Then in January, the first selections of Roma start for Nazi detention centers outside Berlin, for example, Marzahn and other labor camps. So that is pretty early. And then in September, the Nuremberg laws especially 2 coal laws that constitute the so-called Nuremberg laws, get created. The law for the protection of German blood and honor, and the so-called Reich citizenship law that basically stripped any so-called Aryan, non-German person of their civil rights, of very important civil rights, etc. Then, and 2 months later, Roma and Black people are also included in that. And now in Germany, in 1936, we have already 400 Roma and Sinti that get transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. So that's pretty early. And then Hitler's so-called annexation to Austria in March 1938 makes it really, really hard for Austrian Roma. I say annexation in quotation marks because Hitler was enthusiastically greeted and welcomed by thousands of enthusiastic Austrians. And then more repressive, especially then more repressive laws are happening in Austria. All Roma losing their civil rights. And also often there, it was very difficult to make money. A lot of them played music in public, for example, had other jobs, and it was illegal to do that, for example. Then in May 1938, Romani children are forbidden to go to school in Austria. Often traveling Romani children, such as Stojka, would go for a few weeks to a school if a school was close by where they had stopped. And then, of course, other Romani children, students who had settled down with their families, they were not able to go to school anymore. Forced labor, actually slave labor, became systematic. And then we have the so-called Himmler's decree, the so-called total solution of the gypsy problem that actually triggers now the start of the deportation of all Roma. And then traveling life is outlawed. So that means Ceija was born into a traveling family. Actually, her group was a Lovara group, and she was born into it. And while they were traveling, and they had to now stop, so they took their wagon and horses to friends in Vienna, and they adjusted that wagon to make it a little wooden cabin. It was illegal to buy property for them. Ceija's grandmother already had property. She was settled in Burgenland, and she actually had a house when Ceija was a child. Mixed marriages were prohibited, etc. And then in 1942, the Auschwitz decree now includes the call for all Roma. Okay, now let's make a jump to 1945. The war is over. It takes months for Ceija and her mother to leave the last camp, and I will talk about those camps where they were detained, interned in a bit. And it took months before they came back to Vienna, and actually her family is it's very unusual. They were extremely lucky. They only lost their father. Ceija only lost her father and her youngest sibling. She had, altogether, they were 6 siblings. So that's highly unusual, because out of 11,000 Roma in Austria, only 2,000 survived. Now, what was highly difficult for the Roma, they had trouble getting compensation for many, many years, and often even if they had applied, by the time they were granted, and usually a very meager compensation, the survivors and victims had already passed away. One problem was that the West German courts argued until 1965, I believe, that those deported before 1943 were supported for asocial reasons, and they had first been taken by the police, and they were not taken for racial reasons. So that didn't help. But then Helmut Schmidt, the chancellor, West German chancellor at the time in 1982, then formally recognized the Nazi Romani genocide. Now let's get back to the impact of these laws on Ceija Stojka and her family. Ceija was 9 years old when her mother and her children were arrested in Vienna in 1943. Here we see a painting that highlights, shows her mother, Sidi, and it's called Mama, and she usually appears in a red dress. She was very, very influential and close to Ceija, and very influential to help her survival through very clever ways, often in the various camps. You see her at a stopping point in the woods and holding sunflowers in her hand and a bucket. There's a sunflower field in the back. The sunflowers are very special flowers for Ceija. Oh, lots of sunflowers up there too. And she recalled to me, for example, that and the Roma traditionally have been very resourceful, many of them, that her father once stitched 5 big sunflowers together for her to create a skirt so that she could also go to a dance, a ball, as she calls it, a dance event among the Roma. Here we see a photograph after the war of Ceija's mother back in Vienna. And here we see her father before the war and Vaka, and you see the head of the horse in the background. The Lovara, I mentioned that earlier, they were horse traders and originally came from Hungary. And so they were still involved in horse. Her family was definitely involved professionally in horse trading. Now her father had already been deported 2 years earlier in 1941, 2 years before the rest of the family got deported. He was brought to Dachau, outside Munich, and killed in Hartheim, Austria, through the Nazi euthanasia program. Ceija's oldest sibling, Mitzi, was already interned at this brutal Austrian labor camp called Langenbach, from where she was later brought to Auschwitz. Now, on March 3rd, 1943, Didi and 5 of her 6 children were pushed into a car and brought to a Viennese prison, from where they were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau several weeks later. Almost 60 years later, Ceija Stojka depicted this scene in a drawing entitled "Today is Yesterday." In the center, we see her pressed against her mother, both forcefully taken by 2 SS officers. The Nazi's hand grabbing around her mother's neck looms large and resembles a huge furry claw that appears to strangle her. The officer's mouth, open as if he's about to devour her, looks like that of a ferocious animal. Both mother and daughter face the viewer, eyes wide open. In the left upper corner is a car, already stuffed with many faceless bodies that will take them to the train station. Part of the frame on the right lower corner is the family wagon, surrounded by 2 horses eating, with chickens running around and a table with food still on it. Past, present, and future collide in this moment of visual thinking. On the drawing's reverse side, we find the commentary, "Today is yesterday," and among several sentences, the statement, quote, "We Roma or Sinti, we have not done any harm to anybody." And Ceija also asks, is it different today? A drawing of a murdered person's head, the mouth still wide open, is accompanied by several statements, including, quote, "Whom did God hear? Nobody. He was murdered," referring to the Roma. He was killed, like so many others, end of quote. In an interview with me, Stojka explained the title of this drawing by stating, "Because it is always there for me." Her emphasis on the simultaneity of past and present is a key feature of her works, depicting her horrors that she had to endure in Auschwitz-Birkenau, Ravensbrück, and Bergen-Belsen. Her art appeals to the viewer never to allow the atrocious past to be repeated. It shows memory as a representation of the past. The German term Vergegenwärtigung, a translation of the word representation, calls attention to this form of presenting the past in the here and now. Out of the 184 drawings of her so-called dark pictures about the Holocaust, 40 of them include commentary in written or visual form on the back, demonstrating her concern about the present time and the future. Many of her works that I would describe as thinking in pictures also combine text and image on the front, drawing the viewers directly into the scene by addressing them through comments or questions. Ceija often included fragments of dialogues between mothers and children, Nazis shouting orders, or victims crying. She also draws us into the scene as witnesses. The viewer as witness is crucial. Josie Leclerc emphasizes the witness function in the portraits that were sketched in the camps. But I think we also need to include post-Holocaust art and become cognizant of the important act of being a witness to the witness. Here, the painting asks us to bear witness on multiple levels, such as to witnessing God's eye, and you see it on the top, crying over the scene that took place Christmas 1944 in Ravensbrück, when Ceija and a few other children were taken away to the horror of their mothers and taken out of sight from them, and they were allowed to play for a little bit of time. They were also given a piece of orange to eat, which was certainly a highly unusual treat. This memory image also asks us to witness the ravens. You see the birds on top. God's ambassadors for Ceija that mediate between the two worlds of terror in the camp and freedom outside of it. We are witnesses, of course, to the painted scene itself, witnessed and preserved by the artist for us to see and learn. In the presentation here last week by the Victor family, you heard quotes by Elie Wiesel, who also emphasized our moral obligation to bear witness so that the atrocities of the past will not be repeated. At the age of 56, Ceija started expressing her memories and burning questions almost daily on canvas, paper, or other recycled material, trying to deal with the demons of her nightmares, trying to understand what happened and why, and trying to free herself from a past that she carried with her all her life. Besides documenting the atrocities through art, the process of creation itself provided her with an outlet to express the unspeakable. As Barbara Ann Baker states within the context of PTSD art therapy, many traumatic experiences are expressed non-verbally in kinesthetic or visual forms, and creative processes can help facilitate access to these memories so that healing can take place. And according to Daniel Wojcik, the medium of the artwork itself can serve as a container for managing overwhelming emotions and intrusive traumatic memories. Out of the estimated 11,000 Austrian Roma and Sinti, only about 2,000 survived the Nazi genocide. One watercolor entitled "They Devoured Us" recalls the fear of the Nazi mass killings. The viewer faces the ferocious-looking grayish animal face with blood-drawn eyes, mouth wide open, and apparently ready to devour the viewer. The blood-stained mouth interior suggests a scary, cavernous abyss of violent consumption. The swastika at the top of the creature's head reminds us that we are facing a Nazi officer depicted as a dehumanized creature. The drawing captures the fear, viscerally remembered, of being devoured and killed. The reverse side of the drawing provides a commentary by only one color. The whole side is painted orange, which refers to an Austrian right-wing, xenophobic political party at the time. Here you see another example of a deportation scene that reveals the terror and chaos preceding the Nazi murders. This painting commemorates one particular deportation that is still painfully present for many Roma in Austria today. The Heller Meadow, used as a stopping place in Vienna since the Middle Ages, was fenced off by the Nazis before they deported all travelers from there, including Ceija's grandmother, in 1941. The painting freezes the moment of terror in time. Smoke rises out of colorful wagons that appear to be huddled together. Roma of all ages are visible between the wagons, adding life to the scene through their colorful clothing. But their raised arms and the Nazis surrounding them with guns reveal the brutal disruption. Tables with empty chairs surround them still carry food. Ceija, who spent many hours at this site, recalls a visit by Eva Justin, who was a research assistant of the notoriously brutal Nazi Dr. Robert Ritter. Ceija describes Justin's strategies to gain the children's trust by giving them candy to gain access to their families. Through information, she asked them about family relationships, where they stayed, etc. And then they would also be able to take racial, physiological measurements that were collected by the Nazis. Ceija was detained in 3 camps. I mentioned Auschwitz-Birkenau as the first one. She stayed there for about 15 months, and she was 9 years old when she arrived there. She was then transferred, actually I should say her mother and her sister, but mostly her mother, managed to get those to get Ceija transferred together with her mother and her sister to the women's camp, Nazi camp in Ravensbrück. This was the night, this was shortly before August 2nd, during the night of August 2nd and 3rd, about 2,900 Roma and Sinti were gassed there, and the Nazis tried to liquidate that camp. And those that were still, according to their views, fit to work, they were brought to other camps. And although Ceija was only maybe 10 at this, by 15 months later, maybe 10 at this time, she her mother convinced the selecting Nazi officer that she was already 16 and strong enough and old enough and fit enough to work at the Camp Ravensbrück. Now, towards the end of the war in early January, the last few months of the war, she spent in Bergen-Belsen, and this is where the Tree of Life can sustain their lives. And on April 15, 1945, she, as well as 60,000 other starving, almost starving people, were liberated by the British, who also saw hundreds of thousands corpses in many huge heaps. And Ceija kept warm by playing with other children, among them keeping warm and also eating the wool that they unrolled and chewed on just to make it through these last months. Here you see a map, Vienna in the south, and then the trip to Auschwitz at first, then from Auschwitz to northern Germany in Ravensbrück, that is north of Berlin, and then to Bergen-Belsen, which is basically between Bremen, south of Bremen, and Hanover towards the east there. This painting shows Ceija's memory of the horrific train ride to Auschwitz. People are packed like animals into overcrowded, hot and foul-smelling boxcars. They experience hunger and thirst. Babies are born during the ride and suffocate on the soiled straw. Mothers bind their dead babies to their underskirts. Ceija recalls the straw on the floor, already soiled by horses and pigs, before she and her little brother were lifted up and thrown onto it. This scene freezes a particular moment. The train had stopped and people were pushing the door open from the inside. Corpses were thrown in order to throw corpses out. Armed guards in uniform, along with their barking dogs, forced the Roma back into the car. Some SS were walking towards the station on the left, Ceija remembered, and where a canteen was located. The Roma, however, did not receive any food or water. A few older women who managed to get outside attempted to clean themselves with sand. Others quickly picked some blades of grass and chewed on them before they would pass the mush to their children. By the time Ceija was registered in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and that, by the way, was registered there, I want to say she spent time in this so-called gypsy camp Birkenau, which is a particular section of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which B2E was the official name of it. So the Roma were separately housed, detained, than the other imprisoned prisoners. By this time, when she was registered, one mass murder had already taken place. More than 2,700 Roma and Sinti had been killed. By the end of 1943, 70% of the inmates in the so-called gypsy camp, the Zigeunerlager, would lose their lives through starvation, violence, diseases, medical experimentation, or killings through gas. Children hardly had a chance to survive. On the left, the painting Gypsy Camp Birkenau recalls the day after Ceija's arrival. The birch forest, and Birke means birch in English, that we see just behind the electrified black barbed wire fence defines the painting as well as the rows of women and their children. We see the white tree trunks and the green foliage and the colorful garments of the Roma who are still wearing their own clothes. Ceija remembered how they waited in line for soup, holding the bowls which would easily tip over. She recalled mothers untying their dead babies from beneath their skirts and digging little graves with their hands in the wet earth near the barbed wired fence to bury their children. About 23,000 Roma and Sinti were housed in the so-called gypsy camp. Between 800 and 1,000 prisoners were packed into 32 windowless, drafty barracks. Men and women were separated and forced to cramp together in 3-tiered wooden bunks, often without a blanket. The Block 10 painting, which is postcard size that you see here, shows the starkness of the situation. Ceija painted the numerous grayish-white heads by simply pressing her thumb down with paint. The people are faceless and stick out like corpses out of the dark. They display the inmates' experience of having been stripped of their humanity and their individuality. Especially after May 1943, overcrowding and catastrophic hygienic conditions increased. Those who were considered physically fit enough to work, including children, were forced to do hard labor, such as draining ditches or laying the track to the crematoria. Stojka and her little brother had to carry heavy stones for construction work. Many Romani children and twins had to endure medical experiments by the infamous SS doctor Josef Mengele, including Ceija's beloved youngest brother, Ossi. Ossi died in May 1944 from typhus. All her life, his sister mourned, especially the loss of her brother, which was deeply traumatic for her, and he was only 7. In our ink drawing, There's No Hope, we see 3 uniformed Nazis. 2 of them have animal faces, whereas the one in the middle resembles Hitler, with a so-called Hitler mustache, as Stojka called it. A string of barbed wire separates this trio from the handwritten comment, "There's no," quote, "there's no hope." And all of the victims' watches stopped for them. Death is in mourning. Keep marching. The melodies of howling dogs. End of quote. Like the adults, children witnessed much abuse and terror. Ceija saw her 3 siblings brutally whipped, or 3 older siblings brutally whipped because one of them had supposedly stolen a bar of soap. She also witnessed the callous shooting of a 4-year-old girl who had been caught with an apple. She still remembers the red apple, which the SS guard who killed the girl intentionally enjoyed afterwards in front of the horrified inmates. Young Ceija's astute observations of life in the Nazi camps are reflected in the artist's detailed drawings more than 60 years later. In various conversations, Ceija called attention to the different kinds of Nazi uniforms, boots, and pants, as well as Nazi regalia and even ways how the belts were tightened or how pants fell based on the way they were cut. She also painted the idiosyncratic postures and movements of Nazi officers, including bowed legs and different kinds of mustaches. Her drawing, Jawohl, Yes Sir, offers an example of her detailed work, which represents 3 SS officers of different ranks. On the reverse side, she writes, "The SS seen from my perspective, the SS in front of the barracks in the camp." The young Ceija paid attention. In 2011, she wondered, quote, "I would be interested today to know what happened to their medals. Who is wearing them and who is polishing them and who is gloating over them? Yes, I would like to know that." Here we see a different kind of expression of Ceija's camp experiences. It's called darkness and captures the nightmare in an abstract way. The following piece remembers the horror in yet another way through a mix of abstract and figurative drawing. On the bottom, we read dying children. And above that, the mothers have to watch. On the backside, she writes, at that time, in 1945, at that time I was in the midst of them, protected by my mama. From the outside, there was no help. Why? As Gabriele Thönauer wrote in 1998, the Roma became the forgotten victims of the Holocaust. Not one Romani witness was called to testify at the trials. Not one perpetrator was accused of the systematic slaughtering of the European Roma. Ceija's art, however, remembers them. We even see the artist's desire to return dignity and humanity to those who had to suffer and who were brutally killed. One painting deserves a special look. Ceija named it The Beauties of Auschwitz. Here, she imagines a group of 7 naked women and children who are about to die in the gas chamber. One of them carries a child on her back. Some hug and support each other. The woman in the center tries to hide her genitals, ashamed of her nakedness. As Ceija explained to me, she intentionally did not paint eyes for most of them, since the shame for a Romney of having to display her body is an additional enormous burden to carry. Here, however, we witness beauty in the face of ultimate terror and destruction, dignity restored through art as a powerful medium of memory. I view Ceija Stojka's work as a visual memory space that emphasizes the presentness of history. It suggests memory as a spatial configuration, not as a linear narrative of past and present that stages those historical experiences. They recall Walter Benjamin's notion of the dialectical image that, according to him, is a memory image. He also calls it Eingedenken in German, which has been translated by critics as insightful remembrance. The German Jewish philosopher Benjamin, who tried to escape from the Nazis and tragically took his life at the French-Spanish border in 1940, likened his concept of the dialectical image as a non-linear and non-narrative snapshot, like a photograph, that you only see in a glimpse, in which past, present, and imagined future come together, thus providing the view with a different optics, as he called it, ein neuer Blick, or a new way of perception. The following pieces illustrate this memory space, which also foreground the construction of history. On the left, we see one of the notoriously brutal female prison guards, Grobbel, painted as a stick figure that literally consists of a swastika. The painting, The Dance on the Swastika, also recalls Hitler in a similar way, but as a figure that the artist has deconstructed in an imaginary way, pointing to a future possibility. The Hitler figure is in the process of literally destroying himself and falling apart. We are reminded that our understanding of history is always a construct, and thus is something that can be changed. These ink drawings also experiment with the different parts of the swastika. The last section shows how a bird emerges from the slats, escaping the Nazi terror through reconfiguring the swastika symbol in new ways. Overall, Ceija Stojka's art, I believe, is a powerful memory project against forgetting. In her autobiography, entitled We Live in Secrecy, she writes about the need to prevent a second Holocaust. And I quote, "When I out myself as a Viennese Romani woman in public in Austria, it is a great risk because it is evident that the Roma and Sinti among us have been oppressed for centuries. But we need to open up, meaning to the majority culture, otherwise all Roma will get dumped into a hole again." End of quote. Her works make the viewer feel the shame, fear, pain, despair, and hopelessness. They carry the hissing of the wind, the smell of the smoke rising from the chimneys of the gas chambers, and the wailing of the victims' cries. They also transport the sound of the barks of the German Shepherd dogs, the commands of their SS handlers. These works remember the past and confront us as witnesses to take a position for a different future. Ceija asked me to end all presentations about her life and work on a life-affirming note. For that reason, I will show you a few of her nature paintings that reveal her love for nature and happy memories of her traveling life. This one is called Summertime, featuring a field of sunflowers, her favorite flower. Another nature scene, parts of a cornfield with colorful flowers immersed in it. She called that one I Love You. This one she called The Wintisses. This is interesting. We have the titles because basically they're memory images when she was talking to me and also to my colleague Laurelie French, who also went many times on her own or we went together. We asked about the what memories, what experiences were represented in the paintings and what title these have, or what titles she would give them. This one is simply called Feeling, as well as this one. And then we have Wintertime here, which shows life in the snow, in the wagon, but in the winter, they would station their wagons in a town and not travel. She was Roman Catholic, so you see here a reminder, she put the Madonna Maria figure in blue into this picture as well. After the war, she briefly lived with her mother in an apartment in Vienna until they were kicked out by other people who had returned from the camps and who were considered, who were supposed to live there. And then they went back to their traveling life for a while. In the 1950s and 60s, she sold with her mother and other women rugs and fabrics and other items at markets and also went door to door. In the late 1980s, and by that time she lives in an apartment, has been living for a long time, she then starts to write and to paint. I will now conclude with one of her poems. She also wrote lovely poems and interesting essays, wrote down fairy tales, and I will conclude with a poem which is called which she called a love poem to life. Don't be sad, even if you feel that way. Don't hang your head. It's not so bad as you think right now. Look on the other side of your path. Look how the apple blossoms reach out and turn to surrender themselves to the gentle rain. Let me tell you, rain and each day are a gift to you of life. Look at the bees buzzing, at the little ants gathering for their lives. You too should take a deep breath and say, yes, to life. Thank you.
What he thinks the most important takeaway is from Stojka's artwork.
Her art, and she also confirmed that with me many times, also for other interviews, she hopes that we will not forget what happened to the Roma people as well as other people ever, and make sure we do everything we can to avoid a second Holocaust that she deeply believed could easily happen until the end of her life. Another way is she considers her art. No, actually, she considered me, like when I was getting ready to bring all the artwork over here to the States together with Laurelie, but she said, you are a bridge, a very important bridge, people like you, non-Roma, trying to understand their cultures and then share it with the world, with the non-Roma. And I think her art is exactly that. It builds bridges and creates dialogue. And it is also so important because we learn about those people and groups that have been considered incomprehensible, that have been as so foreign and have been misunderstood and stereotyped for so long, that we learn from them themselves, and in her case through the artwork here, what their reality was like and is like in other works today. So she is a big role model for me. She was an incredible person and very strong, very resilient, and incredibly kind and loving. And so I feel very blessed that I met her and that I'm able to talk about her life and her work and share that.
Yeah, Todd.
I just wanted to make a comment. I just echo that your artwork brought out the humanity of the victims, and that's just the great value I see in the artwork, and it was very moving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sasha.
I was curious about like the process that she used to make her paintings, because there was a lot of symbolism and that could be found in the paintings. And I wanted to ask how much of it was like predetermined, she like thought it out or sketched it out, and how much of it was more of like an instinctual process. Because at the same time, even though they were very symbolic, they also seem very like visceral, you know?
Yes. Most of the work that she, certainly in the very beginning, the beginning years when she started working in the late, started in 1989, and then in the early 1990s, and then in the 1990s and then in the early 2000s for sure too, works, she said she got up at night and she just had to bring her memories, get them out of her mind and put them on paper. So a lot of that is not planned. I would say most of it is not planned. It's very, however, she has many sketchbooks. She filled many sketch hefte, booklets, and we also showed some of them here at SSU, where you see where she draws where she does figure drawing, or she also puts memories down, and some of that shows up again in paintings later. But I think most of it is really, she never had formal training as an artist. She hardly went to, only a few months to school as a child and young person. She didn't go to museums or any galleries. So she only saw what she saw around her in Vienna when she was walking through the streets, or what she saw on TV. It was running quite a lot in her artwork. But yeah, does that answer your question? So it was a way, I really think, of just getting, so I mean, she has hundreds of paintings, hundreds of work, also figurines out of dough, salt and salt and dough that she created and painted, or she just had to put down her memories and deal with them. Certainly the so-called dark pictures were, I believe, a way for her to cope with her trauma.
Andrea.
You mentioned that sunflowers were her favorite flower. Did they have any specific symbolic meaning for her?
Well, she told me that that's the sunflower, for example, is the flower of the Roma people. She said of the Rom, and it was her favorite flower. But there are huge sunflower seeds in Austria, especially in Burgenland, where they travel quite a bit and live. So she saw for many summers vast fields of sunflower and pumpkin fields. And the Austrian dish includes a lot of sunflower oil and sunflower kernels and pumpkin seeds, etc. Did that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, over here, Barbara.
I wondered if you could tell us the current status of the Roma people throughout Europe, because they're not just in Austria and Hungary, and what they might be doing to preserve their culture, given that they're a verbal people, and the challenge of keeping the history alive and keeping the culture alive.
In terms of keeping the cultures alive, today the internet is very important. So young Roma they've been on the internet and communicating, for many years now, and that transcends national boundaries. So that German or French Roma and Austrian Roma can easily connect and see and encourage people in Brazil, for example, their own Roma in other countries, such as in South America. So that's important. Then the Romani Union has been very influential once in the early 70s when it was founded. And more awareness was brought to the Roma peoples and their history. Ceija Stojka herself and her outspokenness, and she was very brave in the late 80s because she went against the wish of her husband and her other family members and just started painting and writing things down because people at that time were still very afraid. But she was instrumental in helping the Austrian government to grant the Roma the status of an ethnic minority in 1993, I believe. So grants and government supports, as well as in Germany. Germany, since 2012, we have close to the commemoration of the Jewish and other victims of the Holocaust near the Brandenburg Gate. We have a Roma memorial there, so that's since 2012, and lots of support, lots of organizations have sprung up in various countries that want to support and highlight them. But prejudices are still very strong, especially those who don't have many financial, not much, are economically weak, or often Roma children are still put into so-called special education classes. The Roma in Romanian, in Europe, Roma in Romania, today's Romania, are the biggest group, and they are very most of them very marginalized, and many of them live in abhorrent situations. On the other hand, lots of Roma and people of Roma descent have made it, and lots of women, into powerful, good positions. And they are doctors and lawyers and teachers and successful business people. And you would be surprised here in the United States, and you can research that, how many people, and we believe there are about at least 1 to 2 million people, Roma, here in the United States. You will be amazed how many celebrities and politicians that you probably know are of Roma descent, but they certainly also don't highlight that.
So another question. So it strikes me that one difference between the experience of Jews and the experience of the Roma is that afterward, after 1945, anti-Semitism becomes increasingly inappropriate in polite European society. That's not to say that anti-Semitism disappeared, but it was something that had to be expressed privately. It wasn't tolerated in the public sphere anymore. That's not true of views of the Roma, where there's a great deal of prejudice that is still accepted. And I experienced this firsthand in Russia in the 1990s. There was no one like the Roma. Did that complicate acceptance of the Roma genocide?
Yes. Because, as I just briefly mentioned earlier, like when the first survivors, camp survivors, applied for compensation, I'm talking now about West Germany, those stereotypes of them as asocial or criminal people persisted. And it persisted even in the legal system, so that they were denied compensation. And certainly, yes, that's a major difference. It was okay for a long time, and in some areas it absolutely still is. The Roma are still very marginalized, and I know people who don't like to out themselves.
Yeah, and it's justified as, well, they're a criminal element in society, or
Yeah.
they refuse to assimilate, or to get permanent jobs,
Exactly.
or to settle down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know, and I've done some research in Vienna and in Berlin and in Köln and in Bremen too, that there are lots of measures have been taken to support especially Roma young people to in their education, but also help them prepare for their careers. Very important too. A lot of work has to be done first to strengthen Romani's self-esteem and their own identity. So that first has to be done, and that's still being done through lots of Roma organizations.
Yeah.
So that they can confidently then move forward in the majority culture.
Other questions? Christine?
Yes, hi. I was really surprised to see the picture of the women with their clothes still on inside the concentration camp. I was surprised to see that. And is that how they were in a separate part of the camp from where the Jews were kept?
Yes.
So what was the difference in the treatment, and why did they still have them?
In terms of the clothes, they also, this was just the beginning that she remembered. And I tried to find out for how long, when did they get prison garments. I don't know, but at some point they also wore the standard Auschwitz prison garments. Was that your question?
And there were, I mean, how did they separate them?
They were separated right away.
And right away,
As soon as they, when they knew that they were Roma, then they were put into this section of Auschwitz-Birkenau that was specifically designated for Roma.
were they treated differently, or they just?
I cannot say, and I don't want to compare suffering. I haven't read anything about that. It was bad in all of the camps, but wouldn't be surprising if there were lots of other instances where they received especially brutal treatments by the guards, for example. Yeah.
Aiden?
If we wanted to do further, maybe we were further interested in her work, where would we be able to find her work? And are there like physical places we can go? Are there exhibits that exist?
One good website, if you Google, it's one word, Ceija, Stojka, one word, .org. That is the website set up by the Ceija Stojka International Association that is trying to, and it's still not totally up to date, but it keeps track of tries to keep track of her paintings as we know where they are, and you can find information about her life and her exhibits. Right now, until June, there's an exhibit going on in New York in the drawing room, and that was about a week ago featured in the New York Times article about Ceija Stojka. So those of you who may be able to travel there or happen to be there should check it out. Lots of other exhibits are springing up. One just opened in Besançon in France. And this spring, lots of events are happening. And in Passau in Austria and Germany, it will open in a few days. And there's a Zoom link actually. So if you could ask Professor Bittner to, or I can send that Zoom link to Professor Bittner and he can forward it to you, because I would like to be present at their opening of the exhibit. And hopefully we'll see pieces there. Lots of her notebooks will be featured there. So a different focus.
Did she know that she had been discovered before her death?
Yes, but not to this big degree.
Yeah.
He only became, in 2009, I asked the Washington the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington whether they were interested in this exhibit. I asked the Jewish Museum in San Francisco. I asked lots of museums. Nobody was interested. But then years later, after twice we had exhibits, there were exhibits at the National Museum of Art in Madrid, the La Reina Sofia Museum, and she was featured there.
Yeah.
She was featured in a big museum in Malmö in Sweden, and several times in Paris, in smaller art galleries. So the momentum is there. More and more has been published and is happening. It's quite exciting. If you are interested in reading more about her, now finally it's been translated into English by my friend and colleague Lauralee French. This is a great book to read about her life and her own writings. It's called The Memoirs of Ceija Stojka, Child Survivor of the Romani Holocaust.